Hey everybody, this is Bill. I'm the Salty Old Marine. Today I want to talk about a topic that came up recently in conversation, and that is this. What if I go to the VA for health care and my health care improves or my conditions improve if I feel better based upon medication? So, an example, let's say I have migraines and I go to the VA and they give me medication for migraines, or maybe I just go to my private doctor, whatever. They give you medication for migraines, and what if it helps, right? Do I risk a reduction in my VA disability rating for my service-connected migraines if the medication helps? That's a valid question. A lot of veterans have a little bit of fear about that. So let's break that down. I think the first thing we have to do is look at how the VA rates the condition to begin with. So for most conditions that are, let's say, rated on a scale based upon severity of symptoms, right? Migraine would be one of those. The symptoms aren't strictly based on the symptoms, but on how they affect your ability to earn a living, for example, right? But still, it's based upon, at least partially, the severity of the symptoms themselves. So let's take a look at that. According to a 2012 court ruling, the VA cannot consider the beneficial effects of medication when assigning a disability rating unless, and this is key, unless the diagnostic code for that condition specifically mentions it. This is to prevent veterans from having to choose between getting effective treatment and maintaining their benefits, right? That just kind of makes sense, right? It would be the VA putting itself at cross purposes. In other words, giving you benefits for a serious condition and then reducing those benefits because you're feeling better. So therefore, the veteran chooses not to get better because they want to maintain their benefits. So yeah, the VA understands that. There's a court case surrounding it. And the way you find out whether or not the diagnostic code for that condition specifically mentions it is you look in the 38 CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations. We've talked about that before. We'll mention it again. But just say, if I go to the 38 CFR and I look up migraines, right, and I see the conditions, it's like a paragraph for each one. I'm going to flash it up here on the screen. And I look at that and I notice that there is nothing at all in it that has anything to do with medications. So in other words, since medications are not specifically called out, then the VA is forbidden from using the beneficial effects of medication in their rating. So let's say that I'm suffering from migraines and without medication at all, I meet the criteria for 50%. Let's just use that as a hypothetical. Now, if I receive a monthly injection, which I do, and it makes me feel much better, which it does, what if that drives me down to the 30% range? Well, according to the VA's own rules, they're not allowed to take that into effect. In other words, if I were to stop getting those monthly injections, my migraines would be right back where they were before. I'm not cured. It's just something that ameliorates the effects of the migraine. Make sense? So, do I have to fear getting better and then having my service connection for migraine reduced? No, I don't, and that's why. So let's also take a look at some of the protections that are in place against reevaluation, just to be on the safe side. So quick review. There's a 5-year rule. The 5-year rule says that your rating is stabilized after 5 years. In order to reduce it, the VA has to show sustained improvement in your condition under the ordinary conditions of your life. That's not about the medication. That's like if you get better and stop having migraines even without medication, right? That would make sense. After all, you have a service connection for, let's say, migraines, and if you stop having migraines, by the way, you won't, but if that should happen, well, then you really shouldn't be getting a service connection disability for migraines. You don't have them anymore. So that's what they're talking about there. The 10-year rule. That's a service connection for disability which cannot be terminated after 10 years, although the rating can still be reduced based on substantial evidence of improvement. So what they're saying here is they can't take the rating away after 10 years. They could reduce it to 0, but they can't take it away. Okay, that's not a huge protection, but that's how it's written. Now let's take a look at the 20-year rule. After 20 years, your rating cannot be reduced below its lowest level from that period, except in cases of fraud. So in other words, at that point, if you've been service-connected for a condition for 20 years, if the lowest it has been is, let's say, 50%, then the VA cannot reduce it below 50%, except in cases of fraud. So even if you get better, the VA can't reduce your rating below that rating, that highest rating that you had, the lowest rating that you had during that 20-year period, unless they accuse you of fraud and then prove that, of course. And then finally, we have the 55-year rule. The 55-year rule says the VA generally stops scheduling routine reexaminations for veterans aged 55 and older. So I'm 64 years old. I fall under that rule. I don't fall under any of the others because I haven't had my rated conditions for all that long. But that does mean I have some security that the VA is not simply going to randomly decide to reevaluate me. Also, if your rating is permanent and total, the VA can only reduce benefits if there is clear and convincing evidence of a material improvement in your condition. And again, material improvement doesn't mean you feel better when you take the medication they give you. It means you got better. So again, another level of protection. Excuse me. So how could a rating be reduced? A rating reduction is possible only after the VA proves that your condition has materially and permanently improved. The VA can request a reexamination or C&P exam, especially within the first few years of a rating, if your condition is expected to improve. Now, how do we know if it's expected to improve? Well, very often we have to request a copy of our C file to find out if it is expected to improve. You can also use the VA's API to discover if your condition is listed as static, and we'll put a link in the description explaining how exactly you can do that. And we're going to do a video about that also, by the way, so just hang on for that one. Material improvement. What does material improvement mean? It means the VA has to show that there's been an observable, sustained change in your ability to function, not just temporary or slight improvement. It has to be material, it has to be permanent, it has to be sustained. So all of those things have to be true. And finally, there's a review of the entire history. Before making a decision, the VA must review your entire medical history. So in summary, don't avoid taking medication out of fear of losing your benefits. The VA wants you to get the treatment. You need to manage your symptoms and you need to improve your quality of life. For most conditions, the effectiveness of medication is not a factor in your original rating. You should check the 38 CFR to be certain. And several rules exist to protect your benefits over time. I hope that you found this useful. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, tell a friend, drop a comment. Tell me what your experience has been, because I've heard some pretty wild stories. I'd like to hear about it. This is Bill. I am the Salty Old Marine. As always, have a great day.